Um, I concur with most of the remarks that were made so far. It's been 2 decades, almost 2 decades since climate change and treaties to address climate change burst into the American landscape. And not much has changed over those 2 decades in terms of the political landscape. America still lacks the political willpower to pull the trigger on a national climate change bill, but we still engage internationally on trying to find an international solution. Fundamentally, many states in this country have addressed climate change on a local basis. California, most notably. Other states have enacted policies to change the fuel mix of their electricity generation portfolio. And many of those states have put in place cap-and-trade programs. California, for instance, has put in a cap-and-trade program. We don't hear much about the success of those programs because they have suffered from some vulnerabilities in terms of how they were structured. Indeed, most of the emissions reductions that these states are gaining are coming from what we call complementary measures. Things like the electrification of the transportation sector, energy efficiencies, because they refuse to put what would be determined a proper price on carbon emissions. And they know that consumers, the people who put them in office, would somewhat rebel against high prices in their energy usage. But with this fundamental change with states implementing climate policy, we also have a fundamental change by just innovation in technology in the energy sector that has made the consumer more energy conscious, energy efficient, not in many cases by choice, but in many cases because the innovation is on the distribution edge. What we mean by the distribution edge? The distribution edge of the grid is smart meters are in place in 40% of households across this country, and the consumer is has more interface with electricity consumption, more so than they've had in the past. This is going to fundamentally restructure the electric utility sector in this country going forward. And I think we'll see policies that will address this fundamental change, particularly in matters of distributed generation and how we may have to lead to unbundling of the electricity delivery system as we have it in place now. As far as the Clean Power Plan, as discussed earlier, many in the Democratic Party support the Clean Power Plan. One aspect of the plan that we appreciate is it allows states to develop compliance plans to meet those EPA reductions. In some ways, it could galvanize support for regional cap-and-trade programs or even carbon taxes in place with states, or even states having individual cap-and-trade programs. That's one highlight of it. And then those states can be, in those regional programs, if structured properly, could be integrated into an international cap-and-trade structure that would somehow lead to reductions that the administration is trying to achieve. I do agree that the reductions are quite ambitious, and many of them are residing in the implementation and successful implementation of the Clean Power Plan. And Roger's correct, litigation will ensue once the plan is finalized, the rule is finalized. The outcome is still uncertain. But we do see a chance for the Clean Power Plan to put in place regulations that could reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also play into the role that the fundamental changes that we're seeing in the electricity sector with the consumer having more interface with the grid and the technologies that it will provide for more efficiencies and reduced energy consumption, electricity consumption. And with that, I will leave it up for questions.
Great, thanks, Derrick. So I'm sensitive of the time, and rather than me throw out a few questions, I think it might be best, because I know that, Roger, you've got to leave here in 10 or so minutes. I think it'd be best just to allow the audience to weigh in with comments, remarks, or questions that you might have from the press, from the diplomatic community, or anyone else. Lisa.
Lisa Freeman from Planet Wire, we're an energy policy magazine here in DC. Thanks for doing this today. Is there anything concrete that, what can Republicans do to stop the Paris Agreement, if anything?
Any of you guys want to handle that one?
Well, I think Neil would be able to answer that question. From my perspective, I'm not so sure there's all that much that they can do. But they can certainly let, institutionally, let the administration know where it stands and let the international community knows where it stands. I think that's very important. I think the message the Senate has to send, the Congress has to send, as an institution is, look, the president may be able to go to Paris and come back with agreement, but at the end of the day, we don't see anything in here that's going to be binding on future administrations and on future Congresses. And until the administration goes and consults with Congress on this, I don't think you're going to get the kind of political buy-in for an international agreement that you would get otherwise.
Any other takers? Anyone in the audience want to make a comment or feed in that question? I think that I would just add a quick point on that. I mean, obviously, the Congress can't stop the administration from signing an agreement, right? But I think there's so much uncertainty regarding the pledge itself, because it's not just one or two things have to line up in the right way in order for us to achieve the 26 to 28% reduction. You have to have the stars and the planets line up on the legal side, on the economic side, and on the political side. Keep in mind that I think this is just not a climate plan that has to work until the end of the Obama administration, right? It's a multi-year plan. It's got to go across administration. So the next administration, and even perhaps the administration after the next administration, is going to have to be deeply engaged on this and committed to it, and the same thing with the Congress. So I think that the probability is incredibly low, just in general, that all of those things line up in the right way to meet the legal, the economic, and the political factors that are in play.
Yeah, one other thing, Dave, when we think of the Paris negotiations and the agreement that may come out of Paris, I mean, everybody's focusing on the INDC. On the INDC for other countries. I can understand that. I think there's a whole host of other issues that are very, very controversial that still have to be worked out. For example, how are they going to deal with technology transfer and intellectual property? This is something that has the business community very, very important. I mentioned in my talk, what are they going to do about finance? $100 billion by 2020. Where's the money going to come from? Is Congress going to be on the hook for appropriating some of that money? If so, how much? And they're also talking about ramping up the money to the $100 billion between now and 2020. So that's another issue. Where is the administration going to get the money, and what's Congress's role in appropriating money? And you have an issue like loss and damage. It's a very, very controversial issue in the international negotiations, and one that has serious pitfalls for the business community and, quite frankly, for governments as well. So, I mean, I could run down a whole host of issues, but I mean, when we think about the international agreement, we're focused on the INDC, and the INDC, US INDC has weaknesses, sure, but I think we also have to take into consideration all the other very, very divisive issues that still have to be sorted out in Paris. And all these issues are going to have political repercussions back here in the United States.
Yeah, and to add to that point and refer back to Chairman Rogers' letter or his statement. I think it's pretty obvious that in the Congress you certainly have opposition on the appropriation side, which is key, I think, for the developing country ask, right? Please.
Will Walden with the Wall Street Journal. I'm just wondering what the administration has said about this gap that we're talking about, the 800 million metric tons of carbon shortfall. Have they suggested how that's going to be filled? Have they implied its knowledge of its existence? Is it the kind of thing where they expect technology to improve and a snowball effect where that kind of goes away? is there going to be a crackdown on industry as was suggested? What have they said or implied about that shortfall?
Steve, that sounds like another one of yours.
Yeah, well, I didn't say anything, but quite frankly, I think they know it's there. I mean, part of the problem is that this INDC was developed in a black box. There was no consultation with the business community, no consultation with the stakeholders, certainly no consultation with Congress. So what the administration has said that, when it's ready to roll out a regulation that will contribute to the INDC, will do so, the business community will have a chance to comment on the stakeholders as well. But I think when you talk about a pledge and an international climate negotiation, you have to look at the big picture and take a look at how all these pieces fit together to make a credible commitment in the international negotiations. Quite frankly, we haven't seen that. Now, a guy named Rick Duke, who is the White House climate guy, was asked recently about the gap in the INDC, and he said, well, we put our pledge forward and we're more concerned about the commitments from the other countries. Well, we already know what the commitments are from the other countries. China emissions are going to go up, India emissions are going to go up, Brazil emissions are going to go up. The only countries that are really cutting emissions are the ones in Europe and a few other countries here and there. So we already know what those are. What we should be concerned about as the business community here in the U.S. and the political community in the U.S. is what is the administration committing the U.S. to? Quite frankly, they haven't been able to explain the gap.
Yeah. And I think they don't want to, right?
That'd be my
I think that, so a difference in U.S., and I would put, not to necessarily put our friends in Europe in the same box, but I think there's certainly a difference between, say, if you look at China, for example, and hats off to China. China put a lot of thinking in its pledge, right? They pulled together, I think, pretty sophisticated analysis, different pathways for power generation, clean technology deployment. So I think that and then I think that's a stark contrast to what we've done. I think that we have a few plans in place that aren't carved in stone, but I think that in order for the administration, or for the United States, let's talk about the United States, in order for the United States to achieve the reduction that's been put on the table, there is going to have to be regulation of industrial emissions. I think that there's potential play for agriculture, and in order to meet those targets. And so I think at this point, because the administration has so much going on with the current EPA proposals, I don't think the EPA or the administration just in general wants to be transparent as to what its plan is. Mandy?
Hi, Mandy Gunasekara. I work for Chairman Inhofe in UPW. Roger, I have a question for you. I just wanted to get back to the Clean Power Plan because that's such a big chunk of what the administration is trying to achieve internationally. And we know that litigation is going to be handled in the court system, but let's talk about the states. What is the state of the states to date and how they're developing and planning to address the final rule that we're expecting sometime in August?
Well, thank you, Mandy, for the question. I think I would put maybe the states, as I think about it in real time here, in three different buckets. One is there's kind of some states that think this is entirely non-controversial. They already have greenhouse gas reduction systems like RGGI or California's AB 32 that they're going to slot right into this, and so they're agnostic to supportive of it because it's consistent with their own state policies, and it's probably maybe 12, 15 of states that we could put roughly in that category. There's another category of states who have said that we're not going to wait for the proposed rule. We think we know what it's going to say. We're not going to like it, and we're going to tell the EPA right now that we're not going to have any part of it. And so there's been a number of states that have been very vocal and just simply saying, we don't think you have the legal authority to do this, and therefore we're not going to invest the state's resources and cause uncertainty in our states. And so they've come out very strongly on that. I think that the other states are kind of on the wait and see mode. They may think they know where they're going to go with it. They may think they're likely to oppose it, but for a variety of reasons, they want to wait to see what the final rule looks like. I think among the states in the wait and see mode, we're going to find we're going to end up seeing more states likely to oppose the Clean Power Plan ultimately when it's finalized than support it. And they can oppose it in a number of different ways. One would be to participate in litigation, and I think there will be quite a large group of states that will be in the litigation. But the other more complicated question is what do they do in the meantime? Do they prepare state plans? Do they begin to adjust their systems until the court has judicial review? Do they look at parts of it and not other parts of it? I think those decisions are going to, there's going to be a lot of factors that weigh into those decisions, including the politics of individual states, the way their legislatures meet at certain times of the year, the regulatory systems. And so I think we're likely to see kind of a lot of variation among that middle group of states that are going to some extent be opposed to the Clean Power Plan, but may have different constraints on the types of tools they have at their disposal in implementing different elements of it. EPA obviously has anticipated this. EPA has indicated that I think come September, they will be coming out with a model rule for states who think they can't comply with it to demonstrate how they could comply. I don't think that's going to really sway any of these states, though. I think it's probably more of a symbolic effort than anything else. I doubt there's going to be any states who are going to say, on October 15th, we're opposing this, and then when they see EPA's model plan, say, well, we've changed our mind, and now we're going to come around and comply because EPA has persuaded us otherwise.
I mean, Roger can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been watching it a long time. I don't ever recall seeing states express such dissatisfaction with the rule. Is it really unprecedented?
Thank you. Matt?
Matt Leggett with the Senate. Roger, I wanted to follow up on Mandy's question. You mentioned the UARG case. What bearing does Michigan and the EPA have on the Clean Power Plan? And also, in King v. Burwell, the Chevron deference question. I'm curious if that will inform the court's decisions on this rule or not. In particular, the cost-benefit analysis language in Michigan v. EPA.
Thank you. So on the King, if I can take those in reverse order, the King versus Burwell case, which is the healthcare decision, I would predict that's more likely to be cited by people challenging the rule as opposed to people defending the rule. It takes the UR case, which the UR case said that EPA can't use the Clean Air Act to regulate entire sectors of the economy. You could argue King versus Burwell takes that a step further and says if we're looking at issues of very significant political and economic consequences, we may not even start with Chevron. We may be up for the courts to take a look at what Congress really intended there, if it's that significant, outside the context of the Clean Air Act. So it would be my prediction that you're going to see that in the briefs challenging the Clean Power Plan and the government trying to use that defensively as opposed to offensively somehow trying to rebut that. So I think it will be a significant factor in the litigation. And again, another one of these things that have changed since the proposal came out that have not that have gone against defending the rule. On the Michigan case, I would argue there's, from a precedent standpoint, there's probably not a lot of direct analogies there because both these cases kind of fall within their relative wheelhouses. I think that the Michigan case goes more to the question of timing, perhaps, than it does the ultimate legal merits. What we saw in that case was 3.5 years of litigation where the court ultimately struck down the rule. But the EPA administrator went on national television and said it doesn't really matter what the court decides because we effectively got the outcome we wanted, so the court's decision is less important. I think that could be a theme that could resonate regarding the timing of when the court acts here, an example of why timing is relevant. The timing does matter, and given the enormous stakes of this case, probably cited as an example to encourage the court to expedite the hearing and to offer some input sooner rather than later to avoid a repeat of what happened in Michigan where you get a decision that comes too late to have that significant meaningful impact.
Thank you, Roger. Any questions from the diplomatic community? Please.
Hi, Pierre Paul from the German embassy. I'd be interested in a constructive way. What's your thought about how do you think this gap that you filled, this 600 megatons, what would be your take on what kind of measures are realistic, what sectors should be targeted? So what's your take on that?
As I look at the sectors that are represented, I don't see really all that much sense left except the industrial sector. I think maybe if you get a little bit more forest, remember it is a net greenhouse gas pledge. But when I look at all the sectors represented, I think maybe they might be able to go a little bit more from methane, maybe might be able to get a little bit more with the heavy truck standards than I've estimated. I added them in, and we still don't know what the rule is. I mean, but when you look at where they've gone, they've covered the power sector, and they've covered the transportation sector with the rules that they issued on CAFE a few years ago, covering light vehicles, and then going to be issuing a rule on heavy vehicles. They have the ag sector covered, and so really the only area that's left with a large amount of emissions, well, two areas. One, I would say the land use forestry area, but we haven't heard from the administration what they might be there. And then the other is the industrial sector, and you're looking at a 600 million metric ton shortfall, and total emissions in the industrial sector in 2025 whatever, it could be 900 million metric tons. You can't, if you were to reduce emissions by 25% in the industrial sector, you'd still fall well short of the 600 million metric tons. So quite frankly, I don't know what you're going to get. That's the best I can do. And they're not telling us.
We've got time for one more question before we break for lunch. Anyone else from the diplomatic community? Please.
Dean Scott from Group DNA. I just wondered, I guess on the other side of this issue, there are no groups or arguing, NGOs are arguing, there's a pretty concerted effort by Republicans in Congress to make sure that the industry, or to make sure the administration doesn't get the kinds of reductions that it's budgeting. So how do you sort of square that with the idea that, yes, even if there's this gap, there's a pledge that's out there, but it doesn't exist in this vacuum in which there are opponents trying to slow down the very policy. And you're saying it's still a shortfall.
I think your question proves my point. That the whole edifice is on shaky ground because they decided to go along and do this regulatory route.
Yeah, without an idea, without a real idea regarding the technology pathway for the reductions. I think that's from my perspective, I think that's probably the biggest question. I think it's important to be very transparent and very pragmatic. Look, this is a numbers game, right, regarding emissions levels, concentration of greenhouse gases. And so if we're coming to a point, so for example, let's take the 2-degree target. Everyone, at least as long as I've been in the game, everyone has been focused on the 2-degree target. We have to make sure that concentrations don't exceed that, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I think that it's pretty obvious at this point that we're going to blow that out of the water, right? And I think that there's a growing recognition that there is no politically viable pathway globally for a mitigation strategy that will get you the reductions or emissions control needed to prevent temperatures from exceeding the amount that the environmentalists and climate advocates promote or push for, right? And so I think if you're going to be rational about this, the reason why it's really important to do work, by the way, and again, talking about countries that have really looked at specific technology pathways, the reason why it's really important to do that kind of work is that it gives you a much better feel for what can actually be achieved globally, right? And if you can't get those numbers, then we need to talk about adaptation, right? And so I think that would be the point that I would emphasize, that it still makes no difference, right, from a mitigation perspective. If you're working with plans that depend on a lot of different factors coming into play. We don't know what technology's out there yet. I mean, we just don't have a real plan for this, and so you can't just throw a lofty number and hope that it sticks to the wall and hope that that's what we're actually going to achieve. We need a real pathway.
Yeah, I mentioned that I thought some countries their pledges were business as usual. They should not be taken as criticism of these countries. Countries don't check their national interests in the cloak. Okay? Each country is going to do what it thinks it can, and that's perfectly understandable. I think at the end of the day, people make climate change issue a little bit more complicated than it is. It's really an issue problems, it's a technology problem. And until alternative technologies are cheaper than the traditional fuels that we use, developing countries in particular are still going to be using those traditional fuels because they're cheaper. And their priority is raising their people out of poverty. It's not climate change. And as long as that dynamic is in play, and I believe it's going to be in play for a long time, we're not going to see the type of progress that I think a lot of people would hope for.
And with that, let's have lunch. Thank you so much.